Two. Oh, it got to live before I got to one. So who's in charge here? Welcome back to another NetNar studio visit. And I'm here with my partner in teaching crime, Mia Zamora. Hello, Mia.
Hi. So good to see you as always.
You're not in class.
No, we're snowed in here in New Jersey.
And we got some students, and let's have the students say hello. So just first name and say something groovy about class. No, I don't know. Kelly.
Kelly, you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Kelly. I don't know anything groovy about class, to be honest.
I take it you've been through this 3 times with us, so.
Yeah, so once that you've been through it 3 times, it's not very groovy anymore.
The shine wears off. And
she knows all our tricks.
Next we'll ask Carol to say hello, who's new, but he's jumping in with the blog and the Twitter. Hello, Carol.
Everyone. Yeah, I'm Carol. I'm just happy to be here, I guess.
Welcome.
Are you sad that campus was closed today?
Yes, I did receive an email from the school, and I was actually very happy about it. Not that I don't like the class, I love it. It's just that no school means more free time for me.
Of course. I told you.
Because we know that the problem with the internet is it sucks all the free time right out of us.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And then next, V, you want to say hello?
Hi, my name is V. If you hear any noise, because the washing machine's going on in the background, but something groovy about class. I'm learning so much. I don't know one thing to say.
That's a good thing. I mean,
I'm learning so much that I never knew about before.
There's just too much information. That's
algorithms are interesting. I don't know. There's so much.
That's fine.
I was thinking, actually, I mean, this will kind of kick off our conversation, I think, but I was thinking that, if there's one kind of psychosis of this moment in time, I think, that we all struggle with, it's the issue of overload, how do you manage, everything that comes at you? I think I know there was a time, because I'm old enough to have a historical sense of this. There was a time when things weren't coming at you all the time, and you have to practice a kind of mindfulness in order to manage your life now, or just forgo one thing in order to be present in another, and just let it go that you wish you could be in 2 places. But anyway, I digress. It just I wax philosophical a little bit.
Well, everybody can jump in on that, our things. But the main star, and we're really happy that Anne-Marie Scott was willing to stay up late to join our conversation. Hello, Anne-Marie.
Hi. Hello. I haven't got my pajamas on. I've saved you that embarrassment. But I have snacks, and the room is warm, and I'm, staying awake.
Where's the cat?
Do you know, he was sitting right next to me talking of grumpy tabby cats, but he's wandered off somewhere. I think I moved and woke him up, and he's registered a protest and gone walking. He may be here.
So we kind of put your bio information, but do you just want to tell the students and the millions of people listening something about yourself?
Sure. Okay. Well, I think, as I put in the biography, for work, for money, I'm the Deputy Director of Learning, Teaching and Web at the University of Edinburgh, which means I look after all of our online learning platforms. But I do a number of other things as well, and I think that's really important for the conversation tonight. And I'm speaking from all those different perspectives. So the other sorts of things I do, I work for a building preservation charity. I have done for nearly 20 years. I've been on their board of trustees for about 12 years. I work as part of the leadership team for an organisation who look to support women working in technology in Scotland, called Girl Geek Scotland. And I also, as of the middle of last year, I'm now one of the directors of the board of directors of the Apereo Foundation, who are a open source software foundation focused on higher education. And that's really important, because all of those different aspects of my kind of paid for professional life and volunteer professional life all require me to use the web in one way or another. And that works out in positive or negative ways. And it gives a really diverse range of perspectives on how we can use the web as well.
Yeah. And that kind of
talk with all those different hats on. See if we manage it.
that kind of fits into sort of me as opening, because you're doing things beyond your work. And they're not all gardening, although I know that goes on too.
And cooking.
But we can come back to that balance question. But the one thing we're trying to get people, and all we're doing in these sessions are asking people who are colleagues in our field, like, how do you see the internet right now? And do you see it as dark? Do you worry about things? And so that's kind of the drift of our conversation. But we'll just see, where it goes. And somewhat. We want to make sure we didn't want to like insist to our students that it's dark because we say so, and so we want them to figure it out. And I know from reading their blogs and stuff, like at first it's a little bit bewildering to hear this stuff, and then like what can a single person do? But let's get to the like, does anything keep you up at night besides us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a chronic insomniac, so yes, but that's not the internet either. Probably not, no, because it's really important. It's how I make my living. It's how I facilitate a lot of the things I'm interested in. But it's still, I mean, you mentioned gardening. It's still, to some extent, not real life. I mean, it very much is. But there are places and spaces in my life that are completely offline as well. And so, yeah, it doesn't keep me up at night because I find ways to put it aside and do other things that are very much offline, very hands-on and tactile. And I think I'm fundamentally still optimistic. I mean, I think there are a lot of dark places on the internet at the moment, on the web at the moment. But I think that it's not irreparable. And I see glimmers of hope. So I'm not prepared to give in to the doom mongering completely.
I just know how much you're a creative person as well. And I'm really curious about how you see that coming into your online life, or do you sort of protect it a bit and sort of have it be a practice that is separate than the rhythms of your online life?
No, I think, again, that bleeds in quite a lot. I mean, part of why I feel optimistic about the web is that for every Facebook, there's a Ravelry. And if you know anything about Ravelry, if you know anything about knitting on the internet, you know what Ravelry is. But it's, it is a welcoming community, and it's a social networking site for people who like yarn and people who like knitting things. And it's a space that that doesn't feel creepy, and they're quite explicit. There's not a lot of creepy tracking going on there. It is a place of sharing. And then separate to that, a lot of the independent designers that I follow on Ravelry and on social media, there's been a really, really interesting conversation amongst them over the last 3 or 4 weeks about the extent to which people of color are represented in that crafting community. And so I see really positive examples of social media, relatively small scale as compared to Facebook for sure, but also communities who are having thoughtful conversations and dealing with problems that they identify in their communities and working that out online. So that's what gives me hope that it is possible to have a decent and sane conversation online. Bad examples we can see, there are good examples too.
You may know, but if Jim Groom, and so Ravelry was actually one of the inspirations for DS-106 way back when.
That's interesting. I never knew that, Alan. That's interesting.
Because there's some old blog post about that, and I think it actually came from Martha Burtis, his colleague. But for the rich community aspect, and it was something that was done with the way things are shared there that kind of fed the idea of the assignment bank. And I remember going to some early blogging conferences in Vancouver, and there were always this group of knitters there. And so, when you think about the different groups that are not, massive like online communities, but are really important to people for any interest you can imagine, the beauty is, I think. So I'm an optimist too. So I'm just trying I'm trying to play a dark person, but it's not.
Well, there are problems for sure. you know that the work I do at the University of Edinburgh involves working with our Wikimedian in residence, and we see examples, not really regularly, but we do see examples of we run editathons and then have to occasionally deal with pages that get flagged for deletion, and more often than not it's a woman, more often than not it's a person of color. It's very rarely a white dude's biography. And we know that's a problem, and we know that's a bias, and that's why we run the editathon. So, even in quite positive spaces, there are problems, but you work through them.
Everybody, what Emery is referring to when she says an editathon? I don't think that my students might not be aware of what that is. And it's really an amazing practice. No, it's cool. And I'm just asking you to open it up and explain it to everybody, because I think they'll be, it's an enlightening practice. Yeah.
So one of the things we do is run facilitated sessions where we teach people to edit Wikipedia. And that's there's a combination of technically how to use the user interface of Wikipedia, how to insert references, images, all this kind of stuff, because some of that's a little bit arcane. And it's also about the kind of community guidelines and the kind of rules and the way Wikipedia works. There's quite a lot of, I suppose, mythology around Wikipedia and the extent to which it's reliable. And actually there are some quite strict and good community rules about how you write, how you reference, how you cite, what a good source is, that are completely relevant to writing a piece for college or university as well. You have to quote good quality sources, you try and adopt a neutral tone, a variety of different practices. So we run these sessions that walk people through that and aim to get them to the point where they've created a short article. Quite often it's biographies. We theme them around different events. And that's bled out into other activities beyond the university. We've trained editors who've then gone on and run their own editathons in local public libraries. I ran one at MozFest a couple of years ago. And other conferences with professional colleagues that we go to. We ran a short one at OER 18 last year, in fact. So that's what an editathon is. And a Wikimedian in residence is a person employed by an institution, but with a relationship to the Wikimedia Foundation, who introduces Wikimedia projects, Wikipedia being the biggest one, and runs a variety of these sessions. And it can look quite different in different institutions. Lots of libraries and museums that have them.
There's a little concert going on there. That's all fine. And curious to know, students know, like they obviously know what Wikipedia is. I don't have to say that, but the idea of editing. All right. Sorry about that. I just muted you, so feel free to unmute when you're ready to jump in. But
I think the Wikipedia thing is important. Well, I think it's important. I wrote a little in the biography I supplied you about it as well. It is one of the places that I think is quite a hopeful for all the discussion about kind of misogyny on the web and all that kind of stuff. It is a place where a community tries to work out a set of problems, and it is a place where there's collective stewardship around knowledge, and a number of people can participate if they want to. But the other reason I think it's important for me personally is that what I've learned through participating in things like editathons is a series of I've learned something about internet activism, I would say. And so I mentioned that I'm a long-time trustee of a building in Edinburgh, a building preservation charity. And we're stewards for this incredible building. And there is another, it's got these beautiful arts and crafts murals painted in the late 19th century. And there's another building in Edinburgh painted by the same artist that's now at risk because it's been sold to a commercial development company. And I've been able to get access to this building and have a professional photographer take photographs of it. And we've written Wikipedia articles, or written a Wikipedia article about it and illustrated it with these images and made them all available as open licenses. I've got the world on it. Oh, is that somebody's music again? And I think for the problem I was trying to solve there was that it was actually possibly in certain people's interests for this building not to be too visible. It's a mortuary chapel in a children's hospital, so it's not a space that anybody's ever really had access to, nor should they. Certainly not in its current use. But if you're trying to campaign to preserve it and protect it, you need public awareness. So how did we square that circle? And then there's another issue about if this building doesn't find a future that allows public access, then where does scholarship fit? Where does the kind of history of this artist and something about the history of hospitals and religion in the 19th century and all the other things that that building stands for, where does that fit? And so I have been able to use things I've learned in my work context in these other activities that I do and seen very positive benefits to them. I mean, the most positive benefit is, as of 2 days ago, the City Council rejected the planning application for this building. And we've now got another 3 or 4 months to work with various stakeholders to see if we can find a proper use for it. And that's because we raise public awareness of it and make good arguments for why it's important.
That's definitely
quite a lot about building preservation and not a lot of it. but you know, this is the kind of stuff that the web can facilitate. And so this is why I'm hopeful. It's not always a dark place.
It kind of makes me wonder because, you know, maybe we pay too much attention to the dark versus the light.
Well, we're just kicking things off by sort of bringing up a level of awareness about the real pitfalls at this moment in time, the urgency around especially issues of data tracking and algorithms. But I am with you, Anne-Marie. I'm very much generally, as a human being, an optimist, and I do believe in the light. If there's a dark and light spectrum, I'm drawn towards the light, and the light for me is around connections and relationships. And what you describe is precisely about that as well, and the good work that can be done because of that.
Yeah. I mean, it can go bad, it can go wrong, you know. There are all sorts of stories about Wikipedia, for example, but it's not all black. It's not black and white. It isn't black. You know, literally, it's not black and white. But it isn't. There are shades of gray in here.
But like, how would you like compare the way the internet feels now to like maybe your first entry?
There's more cats. Or are there more cats? I don't know. I don't see as many animated GIFs of cats. I used to see more cats on fire and really good, bad animated GIFs. Actually, there is something kind of missing. I think there was a kind of jokey humor maybe that was on the web in the early days, which it was sometimes kind of puerile, sometimes a little tasteless, but that's sort of been smoothed away, and there's these quite polished spaces now. You know, like Instagram is all about your lovely photos of your food or homegrown vegetables in my case, or knitting or cats. But it's all very manicured and curated, whereas there were these kind of quite rough and ready spaces where people were sharing art, stories, anecdotes, some of them entirely inappropriate. But I think a chunk of that has kind of disappeared in these big white commercial spaces and a kind of attention economy as a thing. So yeah, there is something that feels different about it. Everybody's there now. But,
Kelly, do you have any thoughts about this? Because your work is so much within this realm. Kelly's writing a thesis right now about self-representation in the digital age. And I know how thoughtful she is. So I just kind of wanted to see if you had any questions or you wanted to add any, if you had any thoughts to share with us or anything. about maybe
funny
like an
enough,
older
I was-
time and now versus now? Because I think you really have your finger on the pulse of this moment in terms of issues of representation and connection.
I mean, well, I see most of like online spaces and like these new digital forms of like creation as like there are ways for us to express ourselves and maybe express sentiments that are sort of speaking to like a collective idea of self in some ways. So like there are like ways for us to express sometimes it's like subverting narratives of like the self in like the real world, I guess. Like where we all have to kind of pretend that everything is fine and that we're fine and that everything's okay. You can kind of go online and be like, work sucks, lol, I wish I was dead, or something like that, where you can kind of like express how you're actually feeling. And like everybody online is sort of in the same mindset where they're like, okay, we can express this part of ourselves and this is the space for it. And in some ways I feel like people are becoming more authentic, even though a lot of times people think that online spaces are places where it's easy for you to be fake and to be anybody else but yourself. I think it's really becoming this space where we can be who we are, more than in other ways, which I think is like a positive. I think it's giving people a confidence. In some ways, it's giving them bad confidence. It's encouraging them to do things they otherwise would not do. But I also think it's encouraging a lot of people to be who they really can be, too. So I guess I don't know if I have a question in there. That's really more of a statement of like what I'm writing about. But if I think of a question, I'll let you know.
Well, can I ask you a question? If
Mhm.
that's okay. So I think that's a really interesting idea that we can be more authentic online. And I'm thinking about well, two things. The first is that I think my digital identity is splattered across lots of different platforms. And I'm slightly different people in slightly different places. I think there is a performance element. I behave differently in different places.
Mhm.
And I talk about different things in different places as well. I've been experimenting with using if this then that and some of the integration features in Instagram to bleed content across places, and that hasn't worked well for me. There was a point when I was feeding. I think I was feeding tweets into Facebook or something, and a bunch of the people who were on Facebook were just like, "What is this? Why is all this crazy stuff about data on the internet appearing where you usually post pictures of your cat and your nieces?" And they really didn't like it. To the point
I can't imagine they would.
there's something like they know me as one person in
Yeah.
that place, and I perform an identity in that place. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. And then the second thing is this possibility of anonymization and being anonymous on the web, and the extent to which that might give us freedom. And I'm going to blow myself open wide here and say I don't have only one Twitter account. Sometimes I want to say things on the internet that people I know would not like. I have another Twitter account that I use. But, you know, I've explained the different kinds of work I do. And sometimes I want to express an opinion that I don't feel I can express completely freely under my, the identity that everybody knows me as. And so I do have another identity that I use expressly for that. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
So I guess when I talk about like self-representation like being this more authentic experience online, I almost think of it as more of like a personally reflective thing where we get to explore our own like all like you were mentioning, all those different identities of ourselves and those different aspects. We kind of get this platform where we not only get to like express them in different spaces, but we can sort of see overall like from further away what these different identities sort of create for ourselves. Like we get to see this fuller picture, like who am I on Twitter, who am I on Instagram, who am I when I'm, I don't know, blogging or whatnot. So I guess it's more of a reflective thing. I wouldn't necessarily say that everybody you interact with in these spaces is going to know you're expressing an authentic self or whatnot, and they don't even know who you are. For them, like you were talking about being anonymous, like there's so many opportunities to be anonymous, and I think a lot of people expect to be interacting with anonymous people. I think it's very jarring when like they at somebody on Twitter and that person actually responds to them, and you have that realization that this is a real person and I'm not just, you know, like calling them some name or like calling them out on something. They can actually respond and like say something back to me. Because like I think technology has made life a lot easier, but it's also sort of complicated communication IRL too. So I think when you sort of have that actual interaction online, it's very jarring for a lot of people. I don't know if that's answering any of your questions. I kind of got off topic.
Your point about all these, it being personally reflective is really interesting. And I hadn't considered it in that sort of way. I'd thought about the performance aspect of these different places and the person I am in these different places, but not thought about actually looking at the net effect of that and understanding that represents me. And I do use the same handle across multiple different services to make it easy to find me in different places. And also, bluntly, to make it easy not to find me in some places. Because I set up one behavior, and therefore, if I don't want to be found, I have a different username, and you wouldn't be able to connect the two.
Isn't it kind of, I don't know. I think our perception of we know ourselves in and out, and we think of this identity as this singular thing. And in every context, people know us through these different lenses. And so I remember, it still stands out, I interviewed some students like 10 years ago about identity, and this student I just showed their hands because I didn't want to identify them, but she talked about identity being like this iris that we open and close in different contexts. And it's not just online, it's, you know, who we are at work, it's different than who we are at home. It's not like we change, but we just have different portions of ourself that we kind of selectively, and it's moving all the time. And I don't know, the idea of a single identity is just because we live inside these, you know, these boxes that are, you know, our bodies, but you know, the way people perceive us is completely different every time.
I like what you just said, Alan. I'm just gonna, Anne-Marie, go ahead.
Well, no, so you're talking about these different identities. There is one kind of identity we've not discussed, and that's how we are represented as data. So we've talked about all the different places and spaces that we might perform our identities online, but underneath that, and this is back to the creepy bit of the web, that is being aggregated in a large number of cases, and there is another us online that we don't have access to. That's beautiful, because what I'm talking about are the ones that we choose.
Right.
You know, we control that iris, and so I mean, part of, you know, what our students are, you know, starting to understand is that this is going on, and we don't even know exactly, and so we get some. You know, we had Chris tell us about some things, and you read all these stories about, you know, well, they can track me through the web because of the identity fingerprint of my browser, my computer. And so that's a little bit mind blowing, and still to unpack as to, that's not exactly like seeing who Kelly is and who V is, but it is sort of, you know, munging that up with other data, and just the fact that we don't even know what it is the part that's a little bit, you know, makes me kind of, my head spin, go, what? Well, yeah, but you should, because it's the identity that's accurate enough to sway your vote in an election.
Yes.
We've seen how it's been weaponized. Yeah. But that takes us into, you know, again, what can we practically do in these places if you choose to be online? That is kind of a fact of being online, that a chunk of data is going to be collected about you. And I watched Chrissy's talk last night, and oh my God, there's some scary stuff. But then we have to think about tactics, and we have to think about, again, how we want to perform and be online. And there were two things that I thought of. One I put in the bio statement I sent you, and one I thought of when I was listening last night. The first is, some extent, we can't control this other identity that's being built, us as data subject, because we don't have access to it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know where the data comes from. We don't know who's collecting it all the time. But we are still generating that data. And so you can use tools like ad nauseum to try and obfuscate that picture a bit. So if data is going to be collected about you, try and make that data worthless. Try and make that data confusing. Try skew that data a bit. So for those who haven't heard of it, ad nauseum is a browser add-on that you can install on your browser. And it will kind of invisibly auto-clip just any kind of advertising or any kind of data collection mechanism that's going on in the browser. So rather than you maybe clicking one or two different things and those data points being collected, it tries to throw a whole bunch of other data points in to kind of skew and muddy the waters. You can play with the Twitter algorithms. You can spend a bit of time, reading particular tweets and start to skew the algorithm to generate the kind of content you're interested in. So sometimes when I'm maybe looking at a kind of an infosec type topic, I'll spend quite a bit of time looking for and reading tweets, and then suddenly my feed will change and it will start serving me some of the content I want as well. So you can use them to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I thought of last night when Chris was talking was this thing about I've got nothing to hide. And I think there's something about being part of the crowd that's important as well. And this came up at the MozFest event, Mozilla Festival, that Mia and I were both at last year. There was a little bit of a conversation going on about, do you change, on your smartphone, do you change the name of your smartphone? Because normally when you set it up, it's set up as Anne-Marie's iPhone or whatever. Do you change that or not? And change it to something that's not personally identifying. And quite a lot of people were saying, no, it doesn't matter. I've nothing to hide. But the argument that was made was, if you're in a situation where there are people who have something to hide, possibly for safety reasons, and they're the only person who has changed it, then they're immediately identifiable. So there's something about being part of a crowd and being part of a wider community and thinking about your information practices in that wider sense. And actually, sometimes you can hide in the crowd as much as you can back off and help the online at all. Anyway, they were two thoughts I had.
Welcome, Carol. Welcome, Carol.
Mm-hmm. Echo.
Hello. How's everyone?
Yeah.
I think it's because there's two windows open.
Oh, yeah.
I can eject him.
Anne-Marie, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, this is a little bit of shift of topic. Sorry about, perfect. The echo went away. A shift of topic, but I think it would be instructive for myself and my students to ask you a little bit about GDPR. And Europe versus the United States have very different protection regulations regarding data. And Europe has something called the GDPR, which stands for General Data Protection Regulation, right, Anne-Marie?
Yeah.
And I think it would be really helpful to all of us to hear your thoughts about what that's all about and how it's changing the landscape of data tracking and collection within a European context, and then maybe casting some sort of comparative with what is not being done on the other side of the Atlantic. I think this would be very enlightening.
Okay.
And you could help us understand it.
Yeah. So I think I can talk a little bit about the law in its broad sense, but I think it's also worth thinking about what underpins it. And this is because this is where I think the fundamental difference is, that we see data protection legislation in a European context as a public good. And my perception is in an American context, not a North American context, but United States of America context, that actually it's seen as a prohibitor to economic wealth, essentially. It gets in the way of innovation. It stifles something that's economically productive. So there's a different underlying ideology, I think, at play here. But the law, so we've had quite strong data protection laws in Europe for quite a long time. But the general data protection regulation was really an updating of our law to, at a European level, to take account of the changes that the internet has brought in the last 20 years or so. And so it changed data protection legislation in a few fundamental ways. One is the size of penalty that can be levied, which is substantially bigger. And I'll talk about some examples of how that's now actually being used. The second is that it broadened some of the categories of what's personally identifiable, to include things like IP addresses, some biometric markers, some of the kinds of things that are typically generated online as data now, and that are, personally identifiable. So they're now recognised as such in data protection law. It strengthened some of the requirements around the capture, retention, and disposal of data. So you really got to have very good reasons for collecting data. Good reasons for holding on to it. You've got to be very clear about how long you're going to hold on to it, and think about when you get rid of data. You mustn't hold it for any longer than you have a need to do it. Those needs are clearly defined in law. There's several different types of need, and you have to define the legal basis for processing. You can't just make it up. You have to meet a certain set of criteria to hold data. And the mechanism by which you do some of this is what's called a data privacy impact assessment. So there's a test and a set of assessments that you have to do, so that if you are ever questioned, you need to be able to produce this stuff and show that not only have you done due process, but you've actually, you've done it properly. Organisations are required to have a data protection officer on staff as well. So data protection is a corporate function. So there's quite a lot of strengthening of what was already quite good law around, collecting data, not collecting more than you need to, thinking about what's sensitive data, what's not sensitive data, what's personally identifying, and so on. So there's some of the substantial changes. Oh, the other one that's really big actually is that you cannot be subject to algorithmic decision making that might have a substantial or legal impact on you. And I would have to look at the exact wording of that. But essentially, some of the concerns that Chris was raising around, predictive policing and so on, I think could be quite substantially challenged by GDPR. That's not to say that those sorts of creepy things are not going on in the UK as well. There are police forces looking at facial recognition stuff, for example, which we know is not very reliable at all. But yeah, there are provisions in law against algorithmic decision making. And as of January sometime, can't remember the exact date, the French Information Commissioner has handed, I'm going to say Google, yeah, a €57 million fine under this law. And I think that the fines are something like €20 million or 4% of turnover, whatever is greater. That can be the maximum fine. So 4% of Google's turnover is, potentially what they could look at. Now, I don't think this will happen in reality, but €57 million is a lot more than some of the fines we've seen handed down previously. That will hurt a little more.
So it sounds like in Europe, it's we value your privacy and we're going to aim to protect it. And in America, it's we value your privacy and we're going to monetize it.
Yeah.
And it's honestly, it's hard to see that. It's hard to see that really shifting because it's a real cultural difference.
It is, but then you do have some states who are trying to shift it. you know, okay, California,
Mhm.
maybe a more liberal state, but yeah, I mean, I think you're right that there is an underlying ideology in here, and it needs a shift of ideology to buy into the idea of privacy as public good, and data protection as public good, and that balance should be there. But I think what's interesting is Facebook and Google are having to adapt to GDPR.
Mhm.
And they're adapting their whole platform. It doesn't make sense to do it just for Europe.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think they're doing it perfectly. We know they're not doing it perfectly. There's a case going on in Germany at the moment, I think, around the suggestion that Facebook is going to start integrating data from various of the services that it owns, and German Information Commissioner is pushing hard against that. But the repercussions of that will be felt for most users on the platform. So yeah, it would be nice if it changed in the US, but maybe some of the benefits might be there even if it doesn't.
Mm.
The flip side of it is there are several US news sites that I used to read regularly that are no longer accessible to me, which says everything about what they're doing with data, and the fact that they're not prepared to
Right.
do practices to meet GDPR and would rather just block everybody from Europe from accessing their
Wow.
sites. Like, so, you know, so now the creepy newspapers have outed themselves.
Right.
They're probably just going to charge you to read their articles anyhow. So.
Well, I don't know. Is the Washington Post one of them? I have a feeling it might be, or it was for a while.
Washington Post, you have like three
Bezos.
you can see 3 articles a month, and then I delete my cookies.
Well, 3 articles a
Right.
month on one IP address, but if you're switching between devices and different networks and VPNs, and yeah, you can crank that up a bit.
Yeah.
But I do think you should pay for quality journalism, just to put that on the table. Do support your, journalism source of choice with cold hard cash.
Well, there's a big tension because the tracking and surveillance is tied to the things that pay for these services.
Right.
Because the old advertising models didn't really do it, and there was this kind of hippie idea once that everything was going to be free, and so is there funneling down to a time when we might have to pay for more things than we are used to paying, and how do you shift that?
That was one. Yeah,
we do need to pay for stuff.
That's what's one thing I picked up from Mozilla was that, I mean, the sense of kind of current that was shifting, and Tim Berners-Lee's what's it called, Emery, his
Solid?
new Solid, and it's sort of a containment system that we manage ourselves for data, correct? I mean, and we would pay for that, but what I thought was remarkable was the confidence in which the community themselves acknowledged that people want to pay for that it's gotten to the point where we'd be willing. And I, just as an individual, that seems to me absolutely the logic that I'm happy to be on board with. But I think there's still work to be done in the US in terms of awareness, so that there's a sense of this is a worthwhile service. There's a lot of work to be done.
There's a couple of elements in there. I think it's thinking carefully about how you pay for things, because we are paying for everything right now. The currency we're trading is data. We're not thinking of it in terms of that trade all the time, but we are paying for stuff with our privacy and with our data. So we are prepared to pay a different currency to get a different outcome. And I think that helps in terms of focusing the mind on the fact that there is a trade and an exchange going on in all these so-called free services. The second thing is, however, that the cold hard cash and paying for services then opens up a whole bunch of issues around privilege, who can afford to do that, and the extent to which we might actually see more segmentation and more divisive, more of a divide online. And there would, we've talked about privacy as a privilege, and I think that is is an issue. There's an element of that which is to do with knowledge. But I think we're moving into a place where an element of that will be to do with financial ability to pay.
Such critical points you're making. Thank you so much for bringing this to the surface.
Cheery, fun time on the internet. Yeah,
it's so important.
Give me a moment. I'm going to segue very briefly. I don't know if you can see here. There you go. There's a cute kitty, just to bring the light back to the internet.
That's right. You're right. There are still cats in there.
That's just for, a moment of internet.
Kelly's got a cat.
She's chilling too.
With the dark needs to come the light.
Yes, absolutely.
I had a cat.
I have one too, but she's upstairs sleeping. Well, maybe we're getting, into a late hour now. I'm so deeply grateful for your time and your wisdom, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for. I think there's a lot of points here, and it's nice because the conversation was so different than the conversation with Chris, and both of them, for me at least, were deeply enlightening and really important. So, again, thank you.
No, you're more than welcome. It's been an interesting conversation, and yeah, I mean, I have a lot of opinions, and the internet is apparently a place I can share them. So, quite a long time.
Great, and thanks to Kelly, Carol, and V for joining in on Snow Night.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for giving up your holiday from school day. I'm not supposed to call it that. I'll give me a row later.
I like how it's still Christmas at V's house.
I know. Oh my gosh. I just haven't taken it down.
I have lights up in my yard. I just love them. Then we got cats. There we go. Carol.
Awesome. Okay. Yes, everybody's got cats.
All right. Thanks again. I'm going to end the broadcast. So bye, millions of viewers.
Bye.